Okay, it's about past, so I'll make a start. Hello, everyone. My name is Ben Ashby. As you probably figured out, I'm an associate professor in the maths department here at SFU, and this is Math 360 Math Biology. I hope everyone's in the right room. Just a few admin bits. So you call me Ben. No need to call me Dr. Ashby or anything like that. Ben's fine. My email address is up here. If you need to contact me, please email me and include Math 360 in the subject line. It will just help me to know that it's related to this course. This is also the first time this course has been run. I'll talk a little bit more about the changes that have been made to this course and what it's going to be leading to as well, which may be of interest to some of you. And also the notes that this course draws on were built by several other people, including Nick Britton, Ben Adams, and Alex Best. Okay, so today is pretty relaxed. We might not even fill up the full 50 minutes, depending on how time goes. I just want to talk a little bit to start with about why should we study mathematical biology, and then go through a few boring information bits around about the course in terms of logistics, and then finish up with a few tips for how you might be able to succeed in this course, and then if you have any questions at the end. Of course, if you have questions throughout, please do put your hand up, that's fine. Okay, so first of all, why study mathematical biology? I wanted to start with this slide to think about what mathematical biology is and isn't, or at least how I feel that mathematical biology is or isn't, or how it should be done or shouldn't be done. So one way of looking at mathematical biology, which I don't agree with, is that suppose we have some sort of biological phenomenon. That could be anything from an infectious disease spreading through a population. It could be trying to understand how a drug moves through different tissues in the body. It could be understanding things like DNA replication, wide range of different biological phenomena that exist that we might want to try to understand. And we take that biological phenomena and then we build some mathematical model of it. That could be using sets of ordinary differential equations. It could be using computer simulations. And we do some math, we do some analysis, and then that's the end of the story, right? Wrong. That is kind of an area of mathematical biology that does still exist, and you do see it quite often. And I kind of think of that as mathematics that's inspired by biology, rather than being a true integration of mathematical biology. And the difference here with what I feel that mathematical biology is these first two steps are the same, but the key thing at the end is that we want to use our mathematical modeling of some kind to come up with a biological interpretation or prediction. So we're not just stopping at, oh, I've done some maths and I get some, this is a stable fixed point or blah, 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 whatever. We want to go back and say, what does that actually mean in the context of the biological problem that we're trying to study, okay? So the top is biologically inspired math. The bottom, I feel, is true mathematical biology. Okay, and so we're going to be focusing a lot on how we construct models based on biological phenomena, how we then analyze those, but also then how we then go and interpret those and contextualize our mathematical results in a real world context. So another thing to think about when we're trying to come up with models, obviously we're thinking of mathematical models of biology, but modeling as a more general phenomena is that you'll often hear people say things like, I don't trust models, or I don't believe this model. Who's heard that when it comes to things like climate science or in COVID-19 pandemic, right? I don't believe models. I think this is the wrong way of thinking because as humans, we are all modelers, okay? We don't think of ourselves maybe as being modelers, but this is essentially what we do every day. We see some real world phenomenon. Now, in the context of this course, that might be predators interacting with prey or a disease spreading through a population, but this could equally be looking outside and seeing that it's cloudy today. You see some real world phenomena, and then we make some assumptions about, okay, well, clouds can mean rain, say. We come up with informal models in our brains. We think about those and we come up with some intuition to make some predictions. Okay, do I need to take an umbrella with me today or not, right? And then we interpret those in the context of what happens. Did our predictions match up with the reality? And if they didn't, oh, okay, my predictions about whether it was going to rain today were a bit wrong. Maybe next time it's cloudy, I adjust my assumptions. And we have this loop of how we create models in our mind, how we intuit what's going on, make predictions, and then interpret them in the context of the real world, okay? So essentially we're all modelers, but some of us are mathematical modelers. Okay, and what's the big difference here? The difference is that we still see this real world phenomenon, and we might do the first loop of coming up with some intuition and ideas about what might happen. When we make a mathematical model, we formalize those assumptions. Okay, so we're writing down what our assumptions are. Sometimes these are implicit, but in theory, you could write down every single assumption that goes into a mathematical model. And then you convert that into some mathematical system. For example, this is a differential equation, an ordinary differential equation describing the change in the number of infected individuals I in a population. It depends on various processes. And we'll meet models like this later in the course. Okay. So you come up with some mathematical system, and then rather than just thinking about it or doing some deductive reasoning or using your intuition, we do formal analysis. So this will be using mathematical techniques, using simulations, perhaps on a computer, numerical analysis, any of these things that, in principle, anyone else can go and run. So the key difference with your informal model here is that your assumptions, they're subjective, they're internalized. You can't replicate this really, okay? The big difference with the mathematical model is we're writing everything down, so everything is in principle objective. Someone else could reproduce this, someone can critique this. Okay? So the same process comes up here at the end. We make predictions, we interpret them in terms of the real world phenomena, and then we adjust our assumptions and we adjust our model. So when anyone says, I don't believe in models or I don't trust models, what they're really saying is they don't trust any of this either, right? What they mean is they don't trust this. They don't trust the mathematics because it's maybe scary, they don't understand it. But if you know how to analyze these things, they are objective, whereas the previous one was subjective. Okay, so this is my pitch as to why mathematical modeling is more rigorous, and it doesn't make sense to say I don't trust models. Okay, so think a little bit about mathematical biology. I wanted to include a couple of quotes here. The first is from a mathematician, Giancarlo Rota. He said that the lack of real contact between mathematics and biology is either a tragedy, a scandal, or a challenge, and it's hard to decide which. So this, I think, is fairly true. This was said quite a while ago. I don't actually know when this quote's from, actually, but I think if we think about the other sciences, if you think about physics, if you think about chemistry, they're very well integrated with mathematics, right? Biology, less so. Okay, it's kind of harder to describe what goes on in biological populations than it is, say, in a chemical reaction where everything is maybe a bit easier understood. Likewise, in physics, we can understand the motion of the planets very easily. We can even make predictions at the quantum level. But understanding mathematics and biology always seems like, oh, it's a bit different compared to the other sciences. So it is a bit of a tragedy, but there is a lot of very robust mathematical analysis that can be applied to biological populations. And we're going to go through some of these in this course. This quote here is from an evolutionary biologist who passed away a couple of years ago, Richard Lewontin. And here he's talking about aspects of theoretical biology called game theory. Has anyone heard of game theory before? Yeah. So game theory is a very simple but powerful part of mathematical biology, and was one of the areas that's had maybe a bit more penetration compared to some of the others. Who's heard of things like the prisoner's dilemma or hawk-dove games? We can use these ideas of game theory to try and understand, say, human behavior, but we can also apply them to things like animal populations. And the hawk-dove game theory model is inspired by hawks and doves. So like Richard Lewontin says here, we can use these theories of games or more broadly mathematical models to make predictions or explain things. Okay, I wanted to go through one brief example that is related to my areas of research. So as a mathematical biologist, what do I actually do? Well, I sit at the interface of ecology, epidemiology, and evolution. And what that means is I use mathematical models to try to understand things like how infectious diseases spread and how they evolve and how they affect the evolution of their host populations as well. During the COVID-19 pandemic, it was an interesting time as a mathematical modeler. It was kind of a bit like all of a sudden being the cool kid at school because everyone wanted to talk to you. Who cares about mathematical models? And then there's a pandemic, and then all of a sudden everyone wants to speak to you. I think it's pretty fair to say that people before the pandemic didn't really think about the role that mathematical models can play in public health. But these are all headlines, just a selection taken from this one, actually on the top right is about one of my papers. All ideas about mathematical models becoming very much part of the public consciousness. People suddenly being aware about rates of infection, about things like the R number. Who's heard of the R number or R naught? You might have if you did Math 155 with me before. These things, at least in the UK, is what they were being talked about. You know, what is the R number today? I never thought, as a mathematical modeler doing my PhD, that I would ever hear that on like a daily news bulletin as what is the R number of an infectious disease. And a lot of the core models that we used in these studies, they're a bit more complicated, but essentially they'll be very similar to the kinds of ones that we'll study later in this course. So the second half of this course is going to be focusing a lot on infectious diseases. This is an FIR model, which stands for a susceptible, infected, infectious, recovered, or removed. And this is a very common type of compartmental model where you're breaking the population down into these different classes. They're either in the susceptible state or they're infected or recovered, and they move between them at certain rates. And we can write down some very simple equations that turn out to have a lot of predictive power. So while the things used in the pandemic, a lot of them were more complicated than this, they were also fundamentally not that different. So the techniques that you use here, if you're interested in going on to do something like modeling infectious diseases, if that's something that interests you, the kind of techniques you learn here are ones that you would build on very likely in future. Okay, so what are the topics that we're actually going to be covering during this course? You may have met some of these before. Can I just have a show of hands? Who did Math 154? No one. Math 155? No one's done Math 155. 260? Okay, so mostly 260. And who did 152? Okay. So in some ways, that's kind of good because a lot of these topics were already covered in Math 154 or Math 155 to varying degrees, but here we're going to be covering them in more detail. The fact that most of you haven't done Math 155, that's good because that means it's going to be all fresh. We're going to start off by doing some very simple models of population growth. This could be applied to things like bacteria in a petri dish. It could be human populations or animal populations. We're going to be thinking about things like harvesting those populations, the effects that might have if, say, we're overfishing. Will we get these populations being sustainably harvested, or are we going to get things catastrophic collapses, which is obviously a big problem in fishing. So ideas about conservation come in there as well, pest control. We're then going to be moving on to thinking about interactions between species, where we need some slightly more complicated models and methods. Starting off with some ideas about resource competitions. What happens if we have either individuals within species competing for the same resources or competition between species? How does that affect their coexistence? How does that even affect their evolution? We'll then think about some exploiter-victim relationships. So these can also be thought of consumer resource, or in this case, predator-prey, where, again, we have two species. One of them is now benefiting at the expense of the other. Incidentally, I'm very proud of this photo. I took this when I was in the Grand Tetons of a coyote hunting in the snow. I mentioned infectious diseases. That's going to be a big component towards the end. This is supposed to be a representation of SARS-CoV-2, which causes the COVID-19 pandemic. So we'll be thinking about how we can use ideas from, say, predator-prey models or competition models to understand infectious diseases, how they spread, and also how they evolve. This here is a phylogeny, so a representation of the evolution of SARS-CoV-2. We won't be constructing phylogenies in this course, but we'll be thinking right at the end about how things like vaccine escape, immune escape can evolve, how using antimicrobials can lead to the evolution of drug resistance, and thinking about whether pathogens that jump into a new population, will they become more deadly or less deadly, right? So if we think about the COVID-19 pandemic, this was something that jumped into the human population from another species. But we don't know at that point whether it's going to become more deadly or less deadly. There's lots of classical myths about, oh, viruses don't want to kill their hosts, therefore they'll become less deadly. but there are certain trade-offs that might be involved that prevent that. So we'll be thinking about all of these different topics throughout the course. Okay, what do I hope that you will learn? What should you expect to learn through this course? So these are the rough learning outcomes. So the main thing is, first of all, is being able to construct a variety of different mathematical models, okay? For some of you, this might be the only course you do in mathematical biology. For others, you might be thinking of going on and eventually doing grad studies in math bio, or you might be going into industry and just thinking about how some of the modeling techniques you use here might be applicable elsewhere. The idea of how we take some real world phenomenon, whether that's biological or not, and construct a model of that is going to be a key component of this course, okay? We're then going to be thinking about how we can analyze it in a variety of different methods. So we can do some classical pen and paper algebraic analysis, things like linear stability analysis, which you may or may not have met before. Does linear stability analysis ring a bell for anyone? No? Okay, that's fine. We're going to be thinking about how we can do some geometrical analysis. We don't have to do things algebraically all the time. We can draw things like phase line or phase plane diagrams to help us to understand things visually. I find these to be particularly powerful to help give you some intuition as to what's going on. And also some numerical analysis. So I won't be teaching Python in these lectures, but there'll be some support for Python, especially during the tutorials. Can I have a show of hands who's used Python before? Okay, pretty much everyone. So I'll talk a little bit more about the assessments in a moment. There'll be some Jupyter notebooks, usually for the end of, yeah.
Sorry, just wondering, will MATLAB work this thing?
Yes, I will come back to that point in just a second. So everything will be set up for Jupyter notebooks in terms of at the end of the lectures, there will often be a self-study thing. Sometimes this will be, practicing algebraic or geometric skills. Sometimes it will be go look on Canvas and there's a Jupyter notebook for you to practice doing some stuff. To be honest with this, you're not really most of the time having to do much coding. You're just having to run things or maybe change some values. So, okay, so coding level required is not too great. To answer your question about MATLAB, later in the course, there is going to be a group project. I'll talk about this a bit more in a moment. And for that, there will be some numerical analysis required. You could do this in Python, but you could do it in MATLAB. There'll be some more support during the tutorials. So that will be a very good place if you haven't had any prior experience of that. Please do speak to the TA. We want to make sure that everyone can do things. Also, being in a group project, if you I'll talk about the groups in a moment, but it might be an idea to speak to other members of your potential groups as to what your skill sets might be. So it might not be a great idea to form a group where none of you has any experience of numerical analysis, but given that most of you here have had some experience with Python, then you should hopefully be able to find groups where at least one of you can do that task, and you can divide up the tasks accordingly, okay? Okay, the last bit, like I said earlier, is being able to interpret this mathematical analysis biologically, and importantly, to communicate your results to a non-specialist audience, okay? And this is like a really, really key point that myself and others are trying to hammer home in some of the new courses here, is that it's all well and good doing some great mathematical analysis, and oh, look, I've shown that this particular system has a limit cycle and it's stable, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't mean anything to a non-specialist audience. Okay? So this will be something that will come in, especially in the group projects, but also scattered throughout in things like the exams, to usually at the end communicate in a way that your audience will understand this. Okay. Again, it doesn't matter if you're doing this in a biological context or some other context. If you go into work in industry, even if you're not doing mathematical modeling, usually you'll be doing something maybe technical, and you'll have to communicate that to a non-specialist, okay? Maybe it'll be to an executive or to a politician, or they just want to know what the key results are, okay? So try and think about some of these skills as being transferable, even if you're not going to do the specific mathematical models, okay? In terms of some future options, this is the first of several new courses that we're going to be offering. Some of this may or may not be relevant to you if you're going to be graduating soon. If you are sticking around for a little bit longer, though, we are going to be launching a concentration in biomathematics. And as part of that, there'll be 2 more courses coming in this next year. So 468 is going to be another sort of topics in biomathematics course. It's going to be taught by Eileen McPherson. That's coming in the spring. And then next summer, I'm teaching another applied math course at 400 level, focusing in a lot more detail on evolution. So if you enjoy this course is not going to be a prerequisite for those, but it will definitely help. Also, I'm part of the MAGPIE group, so MAGPIE stands for Mathematics, Genomics, and Prediction, Infection, and Evolution. We have several grad students. In fact, Nilu at the front here is just starting an MSc. We also offer USRA projects. If you're interested in trying to apply math to understand biological problems, especially related to infectious diseases, do keep a lookout for those. Scott, who's just sat there, wave Scott, so everyone can see you. There we go. Scott did a USRA with me this summer. Okay, I've been talking a lot, and I'm going to try to shut up. So what I want you guys to do is to maybe just chat to the person next to you. You guys might want to go through it closer, and ask each other, why are you taking this course? What do you hope to learn? And finally, do you have any concerns? Okay, and then I'll go around and ask you as well. So have a few minutes just discussing these questions with each other. It'd be good to get an idea of what everyone's motivations and expectations are. Okay. Okay, thanks guys. So I only got to speak to a few of you, but maybe I can ask you guys why you guys take this course.
Well, also because it looked really interesting. And we do 260, right? They just give you a bunch of ODEs to solve. Yeah. So here's a problem to solve it. Here's like the equation and you use. Well, I guess I'm learning, but like I kind of don't really know why I'm learning this. Yeah. But I feel like when you're taking this course, for what it seems from what I read, is like I'm actually like applying the ODE or the stuff I learned in 260 to like things that would actually be more interesting. Sure. Yeah. Okay, great.
Yeah, almost exactly what you said. Since I took Cruise 60, the math made sense to me, but I wanted to learn more about finance to realize that it's like, okay.
Maybe I'll ask you guys a different question. Maybe Scott and sorry. I sent the few. I tried to learn your names for you if I don't get them right, but hopefully by the end of 13 weeks I'll get it. What do you hope to learn?
I spoke to learn to apply all numbers to math that I understand and to apply models. I haven't really done too much modeling in the class so far with using tables and lab. So I'm excited to just finally use a real problem and then apply that and to make this solvable.
And then what are your names? Jack. Sorry, I can ask your names.
Style.
Scott.
Yeah.
Sir?
Oh, nice style.
Oh, Kyle. But it's a Scott. I was going to say that makes things easier. There are a few Scots. Kyle. Great. What do you have concerns?
Put you on the spot. Yeah, we haven't got to that part.
We haven't got to that part.
Yeah,
but maybe I'll make that as a more broader thing. If you mentioned like the group project or using Python, does anyone have any like concerns or things that they're not sure about going into the course they want to ask?
So how much, like, I think for 260 content, how much will it be part of the course? Because it's been a while since I've been, so I'm wondering if I should start reviewing now.
It's a good question. I would say this doesn't really launch, like you don't need 260 as prerequisites. The prereqs are listed as 260 on Math 155. As I teach Math 155, or at least taught it the last couple of times in the spring and last summer, it's if you were just on Math 155, that's probably set the other almost better than 260. So I wouldn't worry about this. I think also everything is going to be like pretty self-contained, right? Those would be getting you like a good start. Really, things like knowing what a ordinary differential equation is. Like if I kind of have a certain level of expectation that you know what a differential equation is. We'll talk even a bit about like how we construct those models, but from basic principles anyway. But going in, that would be kind of good knowledge. I trying to assume like as little knowledge as possible going in here. The prereqs were really to stop people maybe who had done poorly on Math 155, as they got like a D coming into doing this, they might really struggle. So it's less about prior content knowledge than ability, I guess. Okay. Sorry, did you have a?
You know, like, how heavy is gonna be on the algebraic stuff, because I'm not too keen on that.
It's mixed. You know, there's certainly going to be some in there for doing things like linear stability analysis, but I mentioned like the geometric side and the numerical side. You know, we're trying to balance some of those things. So sometimes, you know, we'll just be sketching a phase plane and being like, look, we don't have to go down into the detailed mathematical analysis, or, you know, algebraic analysis of this. We can look at this curve and be like, well, we know this is going up and this is going down. Therefore, we can intuit things from that. So less than probably something like 260 had, I would say. Yeah.
How does the workflow look like? You know, mixing books?
Workload. Good question. I will start on that note. Unless there are any other concerns, things anyone want to raise? Okay, I'll start moving on to stuff about course information then, because I can cover that there. Okay, all of this information is on Canvas. I've put it here as well. Please have a look at the syllabus pages and everything there. I've tried to put this all into this PDF as well. This will be on the course schedule page where it is. So you've got one single place to refer to the key details, but there's more details online. So obviously you'll know the schedule. Do note that in week 6, you guys are probably already aware of this, but there's been a date change. So the university has decided that in week 6, that because the Monday is, I think it's Thanksgiving, maybe, that there are no classes on the Monday. The Tuesday of that week is going to act like the Monday. So there are no Tuesday classes, but Monday is being shifted to Tuesday. I'll remind you close to the time, but that means there's no tutorial that day, but there is this lecture at this time. Okay. Tutorials are going to be run by a TA called Maddie. They're going to be on Tuesdays at 3:30. There is a page on the Canvas shell that talks about tutorials, and you'll go through several topics. I think the best thing with those tutorials is you know, discuss things that you want to learn. So you know, there'll be a little bit. I think for the first couple of weeks, it's going to go through introductions to Python. So if you're a bit weaker on Python, or you want to talk about how you use the Jupyter notebooks, that'd be a great time to do it. Equally, if there are things that you don't understand from the lectures, you know, we can run them a little bit more like the ACW, you know, the math workshops as drop-in sessions, or you can do something complimentary. Please, you know, do go along to those. I think you will find them useful. How I'm going to run these lectures. So I'm going to upload blank lecture notes, or gappy lecture notes to be more correct, ahead of schedule. So usually at the start of the week or the week before. And I will fill in those notes. So best to either print them out or bring along a tablet and fill them out as we go along. The reason I do this is because if you learn actively, it tends to be better than just me giving you a printed set of notes or just talking at you all the time. Interspersed within those, there'll be questions and problems to solve as well, depending on what the content is. I'll record these and upload the lectures to YouTube. I always say this. I do this because some people, you know, if you're ill, you shouldn't miss out. But also, people do have a tendency to then not show up to class. I hope that you guys still will do. The main reason to come to class is that you can interact and ask questions. Yeah.
How is the audio in those videos?
That's a very good question. We will find out after that. Usually it's pretty good, I think. I'm using my laptop today. I'll be trying to switch over to my iPad in the future, so that might not be quite as good. Hopefully it will be okay. Kind of on that note, technology fails. Okay, sometimes audio doesn't pick up brilliantly, so it's another reason to come to class. I'd also say, you know, like, see, most of you are probably paying for your education, right? Like, you're here out of choice rather than it being compulsory. Everything essentially, you could just read the notes and learn it from a book, right? All of this stuff is kind of online. You could use Google and figure it out, right? But you may as well, like, if you're doing the stuff, you may as well learn it properly. You can come here, you can ask me questions, you can interact with each other. It will be a much more enjoyable experience. And like I said, there are some self-study problems at the end of the lectures. I would encourage you to do these. They'll either help to build your understanding in terms of check that you've understood what's going on, maybe apply it to a slightly different area. When it's things like, doing some algebra or geometry, essentially of different problems, they'll probably be good practice for exam questions. Who knows? So there's a good reason to try and do those. They're also a good thing to maybe ask the TA about in the tutorials. Okay. In terms of assessments, so there's going to be some quizzes, midterm, group project, and the final. I tried to shift more of the weighting away from the finals. The finals only worth 30%. The group project's 30%, midterm 25%, and then there are these 4 quizzes. So the quiz is going to be worth 15%, and they're each 5%, and I'll drop the worst mark. Okay. So the first one of these is going to take place at the end of the month on September 29th. And what will happen is during the quizzes, they're going to be set up kind of like case studies, and you'll need a laptop or a tablet to access Canvas because they'll be hosted on there. And you'll go through and there'll be multiple choice questions, but you'll need some pen and paper to work out the answers and then select the one that makes the most sense, okay? Hopefully that will give you a way to have some immediate feedback on whether you're understanding these problems, and also to spend a longer period of time going through a detailed problem. Again, that's a bit more of like a real world scenario. The reason I've not gone for problem sheets, weekly problem sheets, is this allows you to take a broader problem and a longer set of material and trying to apply that to solve one thing. And again, that's more of a real world scenario, right? If you go into industry, or if you're in academia, or whatever you end up doing with careers, it's much more likely that you'll have a longer term project that you're trying to solve rather than a short problem that takes you 5 or 10 minutes, right? So that's kind of trying to mimic those more real world problems. They are kind of exam-like, but they are open book, okay? So you can bring calculators, you can bring your notes. I won't let you use Python or MATLAB to analyze things numerically because that kind of defeats some of the object. If you have any reasons as to why you can't attend, please let me know in advance, okay? I'm just going to carry on unless you guys just shoot your hand up if you have any questions. Okay, so there's one midterm on October 13th that will be held in this hall here. That will cover any material up until that point. So basically from Friday's lecture onwards. There aren't going to be any makeup midterms. So if you miss the midterm, we'll come up with an alternative arrangement in terms of reweighting your grade. Again, let me know. But that has to be a decent reason, not just you didn't feel like coming on. The final exam will be cumulative, so that'll be material from any point in the course. Okay, group projects. This is pretty the main one that you guys want to know about. So in groups of 2 or 3, you are going to be given a real world biological scenario, or a scenario that's inspired by the real world, that requires some mathematical modeling. And you're going to be tasked with constructing and analyzing a model within your group, and then writing a report, about 6 sides of A4, summarizing your results and interpreting these for your audience. Okay. So like I said, we, as mathematical modelers, we do some math, but we want to communicate this to people. So that's going to be a key part of this, is being able to communicate those results in a way that makes sense to someone who doesn't have a mathematical background. Please start discussing with each other as to who you might want to work with. We'll talk a little bit later in the semester as to what the groups are going to be. If you don't end up having a group, I will allocate you to one. That's fine. And there's more details to follow later in the semester. In terms of the range of skills, we'll be covering most of the things that we do here. So there will be some writing. There'll be some numerical analysis in terms of doing things like sketching phase planes using Python or MATLAB. There'll be some sketching of things by hand, and there'll be some algebraic analysis in there as well. Okay. So it depends, it's kind of up to you as to how you want to do that within each group. You could work through every one of those things together. You could allocate them separately and say, this person is doing the numerical bit, this person's doing the algebraic bit, and so on. Okay. But you should all contribute equally in terms of effort. So that will be set on November 1st and due on December 1st at the end of the week 13, I think. Okay, a few tips for success. First of all, attend the lectures. Like I said, you could just read all the material on Canvas, but the real reason to come here is to try to interact with me and so that I can give additional explanations. So part of that is asking questions. Okay, you guys have already shot your hands up several times, which is a good sign. Please don't be afraid or embarrassed to ask questions. I understand that putting your hand up in front of the class can be a little bit scary, but I'll also try and walk around when there's problems to solve. If you have questions to ask and you don't want to ask in front of everyone, please do. You can also ask me at the end of class if you don't want to ask in front of the class. Office hours, I sent out a survey. I see a few of you have filled that out. I will offer one by Zoom and one in person, unless everyone wants them in person. That will hopefully give a bit more flexibility in terms of attendance. So also answer the questions. So within the lecture notes, there will be times where I'll say, hey, try and solve this problem, and then go around and answer any questions you might have. Please try to attempt them. I noticed when I taught Math 155, for example, that a lot of people wouldn't actually attempt the questions. I don't really know why you'd come to class and just sit there rather than attempt them, but that will be really good practice for doing things like your midterms and your finals. Okay, there will be similar problems. Working on the course outside of class, I guess, this is a 300 level class, right? You should kind of know by now as to some of the expectations that you'd have in terms of your workload. You asked before about workload. There aren't weekly problem sheets or things like that. The things for credit are the quizzes. So, doing some of the self-study problems will help when it comes to doing the quizzes. And they'll also help when it comes to the group projects and exams. So those are formative, and I would expect you to try and go through those. They're not extensive, so the expectation outside of class isn't too strong. The tutorials, I think, will be helpful, so please do go along to those. They start next week. I mentioned office hours, and also try and stay on top of the material. I think that's something that's it's easy to think, oh, I'll catch up on this, but if you're anything like me, I think, oh, I'll catch up on that in 5 weeks, and I never do. So try and stay on top of the material if you can. Okay. Any questions?
We have weekly quiz, right?
There are only 4. So there's one, the first one is September 29th. And then roughly evenly dispersed, there's one in October, November, I think one at the beginning of December. Yep.
So this is the entire class and they're on campus.
Yeah, so they'll be done in here. You can have your notes with you. You can have a calculator with you. The only thing you can't do is talk to each other or have the phones out and that. You can't use numerical software or Google analysis, basically. So it would be kind of treated like a test. I'll walk around and check that no one's doing anything they shouldn't be doing. But yeah, it will take a full class, and there will be something, I think the first one's 10 questions, which sounds like a lot, but some of them are quite short. So really what you'll be doing now is you'll have this problem, work on paper to figure out what the answers are, and then there'll be multiple choice answers to select them.
And you mentioned Python.
Yes.
So we'll be using that often or just a little bit?
Only a little bit. I mean, it's there mainly to try and show that some of the things that we do by hand, we can also do computationally, and also to give you maybe a bit more intuition. So it's one thing me saying, okay, here's a model of a population and it does this or it does that. It's another thing for you to be able to then go away and say, okay, if I vary this parameter, I can see exactly what's happening. I think you tend to get a bit more intuition and understanding if you're able to manipulate it yourself rather than me just telling you what it does. Okay, so in terms of credit, what is the only part of the course that requires some numerical analysis, either using Python or something like MATLAB, is during the group project. So it's pretty minimal in terms of what's actually required, but for many of you, if you go into industry or something, you probably will be doing something with, if you're staying within math or science, you'll be doing something technical. being able to use that technical software and relate it to something else like mathematical models will hopefully be a useful skill. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. In that case, that's it for today. Thanks for coming along. I know that today's a little bit kind of boring, lots of information dump. I will see you on Friday, where we're going to be talking about exponential growth.